Well, that Thursday night, that's not Thursday night, Sunday night game, or Monday night game rather, was actually entertaining there at the end. We actually got a pretty decent fantasy game from some guys like Tyrone Tracy Jr., who, this is the reason why I said that he was a guy that I wanted, even after last week. Like, after last week, I called him a must pickup because he looked very clearly the week that Devin Singletary came back like Tyrone Tracy Jr. was going to be this number one running back in New York. And that's exactly what happened tonight. He was clearly the running back one, and really up until the point where he got injured and left the game, he was doing fantastic work. I mean, he looked excellent on the ground, and even through the air, he was getting work as well. He dropped a couple balls, but I mean, in reality, like, as a total, this guy was really, really good in fantasy tonight. Malik Neighbors ended up having some fantasy impact. George Pickens got 2 touchdowns taken away from him, and Najee Harris was just okay again. So, there was a lot of good performances, and Russell Wilson continues to make me look like an idiot. So, that's good. That's good as a Steelers fan and for fantasy football for George Pickens purposes. Definitely good start. So, we're going to go through what I got right and wrong. It's transparency hour. This is my night of, what do I call it? My night of repentance after every week of fantasy football. It's live because if you guys want to chime in on what I got wrong, go ahead and dunk on me in the comments. That's what we're live for. So, now that I do these videos every week of must start and sits, and I kind of hone in on some guys that I have the most conviction of whether you should start or sit. Since I started doing those videos per week, it kind of gives me a good baseline here to really judge what I'm getting right and wrong. And one that I got really right, and I had some pushback on this one for sure, and it was understandably so, because I said, listen, heading into the week, this guy had not had a bust game yet in fantasy football, regardless of what format your scoring format is. This guy had not busted yet in fantasy football. And so when I said that Brian Robinson Jr. was a must-sit, I got some pushback for it. I got a lot of pushback for saying that, actually. And Brian Robinson Jr., again, up to the point, like, his game log was really, really solid up until that point of fantasy football. He had not busted yet. His games were, hovering basically around like 14 to 18 fantasy points per game. And then he comes in Chicago, and I said, this guy's going to be a sit this week. And he posts his lowest game of the year. Still wasn't, he didn't drown you or anything like that. But it was his clear worst game of the year. It was not a good performance from Brian Robinson Jr. And just a really bad performance. And again, this was one that I saw coming from a mile away, because this guy had, number one, he's been dealing with a knee injury for the last several weeks. Basically, the last month, he has not been fully healthy. And you can see that in the way that they've been playing him. He has not played more than 40% of the snaps over his last 2 games. I don't know what his snap count was yesterday. I'd have to look at that again. But he did handle 16 carries, so he probably was in on like 50% of the snaps. But even then, it wasn't a good matchup for him. And Jaden Daniels, yes, he did play, and that obviously increases the upside of everybody, from the running back to the wide receivers to the freaking kicker. Like, Jaden Daniels being in obviously positively affects everything that goes on in Washington. But even then, I was like, I'm not playing this guy, because it's not that, again, it's not that he, like, drowns your week or anything like that. But you're shooting for upside here, and the upside was never there against a stout Bears defense, who the Bears could have easily won that game, by the way. Hail Mary on the last play, that was so crazy. But, Brian Robinson Jr., better weeks are ahead. Don't worry about this one. I'm not taking it too seriously. Once you get into the season, guys, a lot of things are week to week. And Brian Robinson's a guy I like long term. It just is a week-to-week thing. Like, if he's got a matchup like this, he's not, like, bust-proof yet. He's not bust-proof. He's not always going to give you what he's been giving you over the duration of the season every single week. Now, here's something I got really wrong. And this one honestly bothers me a little bit. I'll be honest with you guys. Like, It bothers me because I've always liked the player, and I got labeled as a little bit of a Marvin Harrison Jr. hater over the last 2 weeks because I've been watching this guy all year, and I've been watching him, and it's like I have him to compare with Malik Neighbors, right? Like, on one hand, Malik Neighbors has overachieved with a horrible quarterback, and he was, for a while, the only functional piece on the offense before Wan'Dale was becoming very consistent and before Tyrone Tracy Jr. has become a very electric piece on the offense. Malik Neighbors was overperforming his situation. And watching Marvin, I was like, okay, he's had 2 big games, and outside of that, he's been underperforming. And I watch him, and I'm like, this guy doesn't look very good. Like, he just looks uninterested, and he looks like he's not as physical as I remember at Ohio State. And it was super disappointing. So I called him a sit this week. I called him a must sit this week. And he went off. I mean, he rubbed that one in my face. He destroyed the Miami Dolphins secondary. And again, it is not like he hasn't gotten opportunities. This guy has had plenty of opportunities all year. He's had plenty of opportunities. He just wasn't really performing and doing much with those opportunities. So for him to come out and do what he did was awesome to see. Because again, I have mixed signals on this one because I want to see Marvin succeed. I really do like Marvin, but it's also like, okay, I'm starting to see like a little bit of a hot and cold nature here, and I hope he just stays hot. Like, this guy should be so much better than he has been in fantasy on the entire year, and it has not come to fruition yet. So very, very happy to be wrong about Marvin on one hand because I want to see the guy succeed, but on the other hand, I'm like, okay, like, can we start to see this consistently now? Because you've been targeted for the entire year. You just haven't made it work every single week like you should be because you're dominant. You need to act like you're dominant. So happy to be wrong on one hand, not happy because I'm like, okay, let's get some consistency here from Marvin Harrison Jr. But I was definitely wrong. Now here's one that I got right, and I called him a buy low, and it was just kind of interesting because like I had been like getting a bunch of comments over the past several weeks about James Cook. And like, should I sell him? Should I be sitting him this week? And it's like, guys, James Cook is the type of guy that can give you a week-winning performance any week. It doesn't really matter what the matchup is. And I said, this is opening up, like the narrative around him is getting opened up to the point where I'm like, okay, like this is a legit buy low opportunity right now. Because it didn't make sense to me why people were so worried about James Cook. I get it. James Cook, there are games this year where he has been not unimportant, but he has been less important than I think he should have been. I think this Amari Cooper trade has totally balanced out this offense as best as we can all hope for. Honestly. Like, 2 weeks now with Amari, this offense has looked pretty flawless. I mean, Buffalo's offense is rolling right now. They're one of the best offenses in the league. Them in Baltimore, Green Bay, like these offenses are top tier. Buffalo's in there because Amari wasn't great yesterday, but what he has done, he's opened up Keon Coleman. He's opened up Khalil Shakir. Well, here's the guy that we're looking at with James Cook, who is the most important member of this offense outside of Josh Allen. The most important playmaker is James Cook. And he went off against a defense that has looked much better versus the Seattle Seahawks. He was dominating them. I watched that game, and he made them look like a child's defense. I mean, they had no answers for James Cook. So I hope you bought him because James Cook, obviously we're getting up towards that part of the year where trade deadlines are coming in and you're not able to really make as many trades these days. So James Cook, it was kind of like a now or never moment, as a lot of guys are during the season. That's just the nature of buy lows during the season. You've got to buy them when there's even a little bit of an opportunity. And there was one with James Cook there, so I feel good about that. Now, I just want to address this again because I want to go back to, the full, before the season, and I don't know if I've ever addressed this. I think I've addressed it a couple times, but not formally on my What I Got Right and Wrong segment. Joe Mixon, I was so freaking wrong about Joe Mixon. Honestly, it's unbelievable how stupid I look for my Joe Mixon take. And I get it. A lot of people who are watching this now, you may be new to the channel this year. If you go back and just check out some of my offseason videos, I was consistently dogging Joe Mixon. People, and it's so great because people in the comments were like, dude, you are so wrong about Mixon. And I was like, okay, well, let's see what happens. Because I was like, there's no way he's going to be good. Mixon has been incredible. Every single game Mixon has played in, this guy has been a stone cold killer in fantasy football. Joe Mixon, 20.6 fantasy points per game in a half PPR format. His lowest game in fantasy, you take out that game that he got hurt. Week 2, he got hurt versus the Chicago Bears. His lowest game was just this past week against the Indianapolis Colts in a half PPR format, 19.4 fantasy points. He has scored a touchdown, at least one, in every single game, except that Week 2 game where he left early. Mixon has been awesome in fantasy football. So, again, I had all you have to do is go back there in the backlog of the videos I made in the offseason. And you'll see me dogging Joe Mixon. My concerns, they're fresh in my mind. My concerns were heading into the year with Mixon is that this guy is coming into a new offense that was horrible running the ball last year. And obviously I knew this. There was a massive talent gap between Mixon and Dameon Pierce, right? I understood that. But Mixon is close to 30. And I was like, I just don't think he's going to look good, especially considering the fact that guy missed all of training camp. So I was like, he's had no time to assimilate to this new offense. It didn't freaking matter. This guy has been lights out. Honestly, I hope you guys did. This is why I say, don't take everything I say as gospel, guys. It's I am wrong. That's what this whole segment is for. So you guys can see the transparency, because I don't want to come in here and tell you guys that I'm perfect and you should always listen to me. This is not a dictatorship. I come here to give guidance based on my 10 plus years of fantasy experience, and I've won dozens and dozens of championships, some for big money. But at the same time, I'm wrong a lot. And Mixon is a prime example of me being unbelievably hard. Unbelievably hard-headed and just dumb in the offseason about this take. Congrats to Joe Mixon and anyone who drafted him, because he has been absolutely a nightmare for me personally, because I drafted absolutely zero of him anywhere. And I'm in 100+ leagues, mind you, combining best ball with redraft and dynasty. 100+ leagues, I don't have Joe Mixon in one league. Every time I play Joe Mixon, I am almost peeing my pants. He's just been that good. So congrats to anyone who drafted him. Congrats to anybody who held their ground when I was saying dogging him in the offseason, because you guys were right on this one really big, and I was really wrong on this one. Now, here's something that I got right. Going back to my preseason takes, heading into last year, I was so big on this guy, and it worked. It worked out really big. I'm really deep into, I do believe there's two parts to this, right? The first part to this is I want people to understand that I do not always think it's a good idea to chase the outlier in fantasy football. Somebody like a Kyron Williams, right? Kyron Williams is so small, and it was really slow at the combine. Historically, that combination doesn't work in fantasy football. That's an unbelievable outlier. Tank Dell last year, total outlier. A lot of times it's not good to chase the outlier. But there was one particular strain type of outlier that I have been chasing for years now, And that's the surprise running back who is a mid to late round pick, but ends up being a top 3 to 5 running back. And last year, my choice for that guy was Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne was, very affordable last year, and he ended up being a top 5 running back in fantasy football. And a lot of people just were like really big on him this year. Like I saw a lot of fantasy creators who were really big on Travis Etienne before the year. And it made no sense to me whatsoever. Honestly, like the writing was on the wall with this one so early. Immediately, like out of the gates of the offseason, like back in March, Doug Peterson, the head coach, was saying, yeah, we don't want to give him a massive workload like last year. And he wasn't wrong for saying that. Like, he was not efficient last year on the workload that he was given because Tank Bigsby wasn't good last year. So they had no functional backup that they could bring in and would take a legitimate, actual good workload off of them that would benefit the team. Like, it wasn't there last year. This year, it's, from all accounts, everything in the offseason was saying Tank Bigsby looks night and day better than what he did last year. And we want to lighten his workload. It was a consistent theme the entire offseason from Doug Peterson. And yet I saw tons of fantasy creators on YouTube talking about how Travis Etienne was going to be a baller again this year. And I was like, guys, stay away from him. Honestly, stay away from him. Luka Magic, I appreciate the super chat. See it right here. Let me get through this rest of the segment, and then I will answer your question. Appreciate your patience. I saw it with Travis Etienne, and I was like, I cannot trust this guy. This makes no sense. And I'll be honest, I didn't expect him to be this bad. And I'm not trying to dunk on the guy, because obviously he hasn't played the last 2 games because of injury. Not trying to dunk on the guy for that. What I'm trying to say is that Travis Etienne, the workload has not been solid all year, and he hasn't actually recovered to what I thought he would be with less of a workload. It just hasn't happened. So, very disappointing, even to my level of expectation, because I thought that Etienne would be a solid, middle of the pack, wide, running back 2 this year. And again, obviously he's missed a couple games. So I just wanted to look at fantasy points per game. This guy is the running back 38 in fantasy points per game in a half PPR format. He's been dog this year. He's been awful. Not even a running back 3 on a points per game basis. So I really was, kind of beating the drum on do not draft Travis Etienne this year. I drafted him probably 3 times out of all the 100+ leagues that I'm in this year. And I feel really good about that because he has not been good. And again, I'm not trying to dog the guy. He hasn't played. But when he has played, I'm looking back to my, preseason takes right now, and I'm seeing, what my efficiency has been like so far. This one pops out as, probably controversial take during a lot of the offseason, and it's turned out right. And to end it off here, speaking of preseason takes, I had gone into the year, and, unlike a lot of fantasy creators on YouTube, I don't think that you can have 30 to 50 league-winning wide receivers. You see, certain creators putting out, league-winning player videos, every week during the offseason. It's okay, well, there's not that many league winners. So, what are you doing? You're just misleading everybody. Don't do that. So, I just looked at that and I thought it was stupid. So I came out with one season or league winning wide receivers video. And I was looking through it today because every other option I've been pretty spot on with. That list of guys was Nico Collins. Why am I blanking? Nico Collins, Terry McLaurin, and DJ Moore was one of those guys as well. And the only guy I've been wrong on was DJ Moore. DJ Moore, before the season, right? I had a very good outlook on DJ because, watching what he did with Fields last year, when he had a functional quarterback situation was such a big thing for a lot of people in fantasy because, like, for years and years, DJ Moore has been a darling in the fantasy community because everybody saw the talent. It's kind of like how people looked at Drake London for all these years. I didn't see it as much with Drake London. I saw it with DJ Moore. I was like, this guy is a stud, man. Like, you get this guy a functional quarterback, he's going to win. And he did that last year. He was a top 8 wide receiver. He was a top 6 wide receiver in fantasy. And so I was really encouraged, going into this year with Caleb Williams, a rookie, and I'll get to what I ignored. But, I'll admit it, I fell into the hype with Caleb Williams. Caleb's been pretty good, but he's not been Jaden Daniels, right? Like, Jaden Daniels has been much better than Caleb Williams has. And I was just thinking to myself, like, with Caleb Williams, like, I don't see how he doesn't have another great year this year. Like, another functional quarterback. And you've got other 2 wide receivers that are there that are very, very functional. Like, very, very functional players. And it just made so much sense to me, right? Like, it made total sense to me that it was going to work. And it's been honestly a disaster. Like, DJ Moore has had a really bad year in fantasy. Like, I'm going to pull up his numbers right now. DJ Moore is not, I don't think he's a top 30 wide receiver. He's wide receiver 27 in half PPR, 10 fantasy points per game, and he's had 2 double-digit games. One was 11.2 in half PPR, week 3 versus the Colts, and then week 5 versus the Panthers in the revenge game. Outside of that, this guy has been almost unplayable. Almost unplayable. It's been pretty bad. So, the one big thing that I ignored with this one was the history of wide receivers in fantasy with rookie quarterbacks. Realistically, if you look back to that history, and I'll do a deeper dive on it this offseason because this one bit me really hard. This one bit me really good. So I'll do a deeper dive at the end of the year, like when I get into offseason content and research. But the one thing is, like, when you kind of dive back into the history of rookie quarterbacks and wide receivers in fantasy, outside of Nico Collins, like, Nico with CJ Stroud was kind of the exception last year. Like, Nico Collins was excellent last year with CJ Stroud. That was, like, the exception over the last, like, 5 to 10 years. Like, most rookie quarterbacks, their wide receivers in fantasy are not top 10, top 12 guys. And I call DJ Moore a league winner. A league winner. That sounds bad right now. And I don't really know how this one gets a ton better, to be honest with you. Like, every time I watch them, it just doesn't look like they've built much chemistry. And I get it. Like, there's 2 other really good wide receivers there. DJ Moore is the best one of the bunch. Keenan's older, and Rome is still a rookie. Rome is going to be really good, but he's not there yet. DJ Moore is the best receiver of the bunch by a mile. And it just doesn't look like him and Caleb have built much chemistry. So, yeah, it's tough, man. That one bums me out because I was so close to being 100% on those. I think I had 4. I'm just forgetting who the last guy was. I have to go back and watch it. You can go back and watch it too. The league-winning wide receivers video that I did in August this year, I definitely had Nico and I definitely had Terry. And Terry was such a, like, out-of-character move for me, but I saw it. I saw it early, and he has been. And so is Nico, obviously, when he's playing. But DJ Moore has been far from a league winner. That was what I got right and what I got wrong. So we're going to answer a couple questions, then I'm going to go ahead and sign off for the night. Luca Magic, I appreciate the patience. I have Etienne and James Conner. Is it worth making any moves at running back, or should I just chill? So this is going to be a really interesting conversation because Etienne obviously totally, like, came back in a big way in fantasy. Like, much better than Tyreek Hill. Etienne was lights out in fantasy football. And I think that with Devon Etienne, it's not an exception. Like, every other player in Miami was so dependent on Tua being there to show not just upside, to show competency and startability in fantasy football. Without Tua, it's been awful. So, he comes back and obviously Etienne has a massive game and gets back in the end zone. It was awesome. The reason I'm so bummed out with Dolphins players right now is this year in particular, because the Dolphins, I said this before the start of the year as well, Dolphins players are players that you want to have, particularly in the beginning portion of the year. If you've looked at the Dolphins with Tua and with Mike McDaniel over the last couple of years, that team has played really well and gotten really hot at the beginning of the year. And then the second half of the year, the weather starts to get colder. It's a warm weather team. They're not very tough. That's not a tough football team. And they start to play worse. And given that Tua just missed basically all of the early portion of the year, it doesn't make me want to hang on to a Dolphins player. And this is the perfect time to me to trade away Etienne. Like, I said it to somebody on one of my videos today. They were asking me, what do we do about Tyreek Hill, right? Obviously, he was disappointing. And I said, I'm quietly shopping both Tyreek Hill and Devon Etienne. Tyreek Hill, I'm probably going to wait until he has a massive game. He'll have a massive game. It's just a matter of time. But right now is kind of like the time I want to sell Etienne. I'll be honest, like Etienne, if you sell him, like I'm trying to, you got to go for big air. Like, because Etienne, you don't want to offload him just because, like, he's going to go downhill. Like, the only reason, like, he would be a disaster in fantasy is if Tua gets hurt again. But if Tua stays healthy, Etienne's going to be flirting in, like, top 5, top 10 territory the rest of the season in fantasy. So, like, you can't just, like, sell him for a J.K. Dobbins or like a Brian Robinson Jr. It's like, I like those guys, but they're not what Etienne can provide you. If you're doing this move, you've got to sell him for a Jahmyr Gibbs or a Breece Hall or a James Cook type. Like, those are guys that you want to try to buy for Devon Etienne. So I'm quietly shopping Etienne. Like, I'm not like. My personal strategy, and here's like a good extra bonus piece for you guys. I'm not a big believer in putting players on the trade block, because that, gives everybody a notification that you're shopping them, and people will think that you just want to get them off your team. I like to go in very strategically and just kind of do quiet trade offers and see what my best offer could be. That's the best way that I've gotten value over the years in trades in fantasy football. So that's what I would advise to do with him. With Connor, I just made a video today. I think Connor is a great running back to have for your fantasy football playoffs. I'm a big James Conner guy in the fantasy playoffs. His schedule is pretty sweet, and he himself is in an offense that when they're rolling really well. And Connor has been really good this year. On a per-touch basis, it just is a matter of, like, boom or bust to a point. But it doesn't scare me as bad as Etienne does, personally. So, with Connor, I'd keep him, but I would try to sell Etienne, personally, for one of those guys that I was just talking about. Appreciate the super chat, Luca Magic. Appreciate your patience as well. Okay, a couple more thoughts before we log off tonight. Nate Dogg said, bro, I got clapped this week. In fantasy, and the Bears just got shot off a loss. Yeah. Yeah, the Bears one was crazy, man. That Hail Mary. I was like mostly watching the Chiefs and Raiders just out of curiosity, and then I flipped on the Bears and the Commanders on the last 2 minutes or so. And I was able to catch that. I'm gonna go back and watch it tomorrow, but I mean That game was wild, man, because the Commanders, like, the Commanders really kind of had that game for a lot of it, and then the Bears scored a late touchdown. The Commanders definitely didn't look as good offensively. Number one, because Jaden's not 100%, and number two, because the Bears' defense is freaking good. Freaking good. So, at least you have that to look forward to, and we'll get you on back on track this week in fantasy. Yesterday, obviously, I didn't go live. And that really made me mad. I was out of town. I was driving back into town from Dallas for a wedding. And the Wi-Fi where I was staying just wasn't reliable. So I just decided to get on the road early and head back home. But this week it's a regular week, so we'll be preparing for week 9 and kind of adjusting our mindset to fantasy playoffs coming up here. And what I'll end on is, what in the world do I do with Pittman? JT Blue Gobs asks. Whew. I mean, Pittman, this room of wide receivers is so hard to judge. Because when Richardson plays, it's so frightening to play any of them. But even then, Pittman had a decent game last week with Richardson, and then obviously Downs had a good game yesterday with Richardson. So it's really hard because if it's Richardson moving forward, I don't want any part of Colts receivers personally, because I just don't want to deal with the headache of playing Russian roulette and figuring out which player should I start, or should I start any of them at all. And I'll tell you this, what's keeping me kind of pulled back in with Pittman in particular is, I read today, if you guys didn't see this was unbelievable actually. Anthony Richardson, he pulled himself out of the game yesterday versus the Texans for a couple plays, and people thought he was hurt, right? People thought he was hurt. It was reported on Sleeper as an injury. And after the game, he was asked about it, and he was like, yeah, I mean, I pulled myself because I was tired, man. I just needed a breather. It's like, what? What did you just say? What happened? What are you talking about? So he pulls himself from the game, and I was reading that he said that, and my first initial thought was dude, there's no way that in this late in the game, in a tight game, where you very easily could have beat the Texans. They had every shot to beat them. Your starting quarterback pulls himself because he's tired. There's no way that plays well in that locker room. And Richardson has already been putrid in real football and in fantasy too. He's already been putrid, not completing 50% of his throws. That's historically awful. And I was thinking to myself, is this going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back? Is this the moment when Shane Steichen says to himself, why am I doing this with a guy that isn't good, number one, and, now I've got this information, he's not even, all in on winning, because this guy just pulled himself out of the game because he was tired. Unreal. And I read today that when Shane Steichen was asked about it and who his quarterback is going to be this week, he said, we're evaluating everything. Translation for people, he's thinking about pulling him and playing Joe Flacco. And if that happens, then Michael Pittman is definitely a play in fantasy football. Not a must start, but definitely a guy that you can easily put in your flex if you are looking to fill that spot. That would be a pretty reliable flex play with Joe Flacco. So right now, I'm kind of in a monitoring the situation type of mindset with Michael Pittman. I'm going to watch this one throughout the week and see what happens, because if it's Flacco, this guy has easily wide receiver, solid wide receiver 2 upside in fantasy. Sometimes wide receiver 1. But if it's Anthony Richardson, I have no interest in having any Colts receiver. So we'll see what happens. Appreciate y'all being in here tonight. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel on your way out if you haven't done so already. That's all I ask of you guys tonight. Tomorrow's videos, wide receiver rankings for week 9 and defense rankings for week 9. So stay tuned, like and subscribe. I'll see y'all tomorrow. Peace out.